3 terrifying reports from the Hookman. Based on real stories. Story 1. The echo of metal in the silent night memory is a strange thing. Even after 60 years, I still feel that shiver down my spine whenever I hear metal scraping against metal. The sound resonates within me as if it happened yesterday. That metallic echo that changed my life forever. My name is Sarah Winters, and this is the first time I've told this story in full. Not because I didn't want to before, but because no one would believe it. Or worse, they would. And that means admitting there are horrors in this world that defy our fragile understanding of reality. The fall of 1962 in Millbrook had that peculiar quality that only small American towns possess. Fallen leaves formed, red-orange carpets on the sidewalks, and the air carried the fragrance of ripe apples and distant bonfires. I was 17, my face painted with freckles I hated, and dreams bigger than the town could contain. Mike Peterson was every girl's dream back then. Brown hair combed into a perfect pompadour, a leather jacket that seemed to breathe with him, and a red Chevrolet Impala that made all the boys sigh with envy when he drove by. I didn't understand what he saw in me. We were opposites in every. He popular and confident. I reserved, always with a book, always observing rather than participating. Our third date began at the Roxy Theater, the only cinema in town. Psycho had premiered 2 years earlier, but only reached our small town that month. I was reluctant to watch it, but Mike insisted, saying he would protect me. The film deeply disturbed me. When the lights came on, I noticed my hands were white, from gripping the armrests so tightly. The killer with a knife, the moans, the blood swirling down the drain. I couldn't look at the shower in the theater bathroom as we were leaving. "Hey, don't worry," Mike whispered, squeezing my hand as we stepped into the cool night. "It's just special effects." In the parking lot, he stopped beside the Impala, his eyes reflecting the neon lights from the theater. There was something different about him, an intensity I hadn't noticed before. "You know what would be perfect right now?" he said, his fingers tracing circles on my palm. "I know a place. A lookout in the Ellsworth Hills. We can see the entire town from there. The lights look like diamonds scattered on black velvet." I hesitated. My parents' curfew was 11 p.m., and it was already past 10 p.m. Besides, everyone knew the lookout's reputation. It was where couples went to. Well, do things my mother said good girls don't do before marriage. "I don't know, Mike," I began. But he leaned in and kissed me softly, his lips warm against mine. "Trust me," he murmured against my cheek. "I'll get you home before 11, promise." Something inside me warned me to say no. An uncomfortable feeling, like when you know you've forgotten something important, but can't remember what. But at 17, the desire to be brave, to not be the good girl for once in my life, overcame that inner voice. We got into the car. The leather seat creaked as I sat down. The familiar scent of Old Spice and cigarettes, Mike's scent, enveloping me. The car came to life with a roar that seemed to echo through the empty streets. On the way to the hills, I noticed the streets were strangely deserted, even for a Thursday night in Millbrook. There were no other cars, no pedestrians, not even cat wandering about. The shadows seemed darker, deeper, swallowing the light from the lampposts like black holes. "It's very quiet tonight," I commented, trying to mask my nervousness. Mike shrugged, his eyes fixed on the winding road that was beginning to climb. "Better for us," he replied, resting a hand on my knee. The radio played Stand By Me by Ben DeKing. The song seemed strangely fitting, almost prophetic. I watched the town recede behind us, the houses becoming smaller and smaller until they looked like doll houses. When we reached the lookout, my stomach was a knot of anxiety and excitement. Mike parked the car in a small nook, hidden by a row of pine trees. The only lights were from the headlights he left on and the moon, which seemed unnaturally large and yellow that night, like a watchful eye. "What do you think?" he asked, turning. Off the engine but leaving the radio playing softly. The view was truly breathtaking. Millbrook spread out below us, dotted with lights that sparkled against the darkness, as if the stars had fallen to earth. In the distance, the state highway wound like a silver ribbon under the moonlight. "It's beautiful," I whispered, genuinely impressed. Mike smiled and put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me closer. His breath had the sweet odor of Coca-Cola and the subtle bitterness of the Marlboro cigarettes he hid from his parents. When his lips touched mine, I closed my eyes, trying to ignore that persistent feeling that something wasn't right. It was at that moment I realized what was bothering me. We were completely alone. Usually, the lookout had at least a few cars, other couples seeking privacy. But that night, it was as if the world had evaporated, leaving only the two of us. And then, something changed. The music on the radio was interrupted by a sudden static that made me jump. A male voice, deep and urgent, cut through the hiss. We interrupt our regular programming for a special alert. The State Psychiatric Hospital of Millbrook reports the escape of an extremely dangerous patient approximately 2 hours ago. Mike turned down the volume, frowning. "What crap?" I placed my hand over his, stopping him. "Wait, we need to hear this." Last sighting was in the vicinity of the Ellsworth Hills. Our eyes met. We were in the Ellsworth Hills. Patient is described as a white male, approximately 40 years old, 6'3", tall, with a distinctive characteristic, a metal hook in place of his right hand, the result of an industrial accident that preceded his homicidal delusions. Dr. Lawrence Merrick, director of the hospital, warns that the patient, identified as Edward Garrity, suffers from severe hallucinations and has demonstrated violent behavior specifically directed at young couples. A chill ran down my spine like a drop of ice slowly melting. The air inside the car seemed to grow denser, almost unbreathable. It is recommended that everyone remain in their homes with doors and windows locked. Anyone who spots the fugitive should not, under any circumstances, attempt to approach him. Call the sheriff immediately at Mike. My voice came out as a strangled whisper. We need to leave. Now. He turned off the radio with a sharp movement. Sarah, don't be ridiculous. It's probably just a stupid joke from the radio station to scare people like us. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. A joke? Did you hear the name of the hospital director? Lawrence Merrick? My father works with him. This isn't a joke, Mike. Mike's mask of confidence began to crack. Look, even if it's true, the chances of him being right here are... A sound interrupted his sentence. A sound that would be etched in my memory forever. The slight scraping of metal against metal. Scry! We both froze. It was so quiet inside the car that I could hear our breaths synchronizing in an accelerated rhythm of fear. What was that? I whispered, my eyes scanning the shadows beyond the window. Mike swallowed hard. Probably just the wind in the trees. But there was no wind. The night was unnaturally still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Scree! The sound came again, more distinct this time, as if something or someone was sliding a metal object over the car's surface. Mike, my voice trembled as much as my hands. There's someone out there. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw pure terror in Mike Peterson's eyes. His hands went to the ignition, turning the key with such force I thought it would break. The Impala's engine roared to life, and Mike stepped on the accelerator before even turning on the headlights. The car skidded on the loose dirt, the sound of tires scratching the ground drowning out any other sound that might have been out there. As we descended the winding road at high speed, the moon briefly illuminated the dark corners of the forest. For a moment, so brief that to this day I wonder if it was real or a product of my terrified imagination, I thought I saw a tall, thin figure among the trees. A silhouette with something curved and shiny where its right hand should be. Mike drove like a man possessed, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. We didn't say anything during the journey back. The silence inside the car was as dense as fog, filled only with the sound of our rapid breathing and the roar of the engine pushing its limits. Had it been just our imagination, the horror movie, the radio broadcast, the darkness of the night, all combining to create an unfounded fear? That's what I desperately wanted to believe. It was just a branch. Mike finally broke the silence as we approached town. His voice tried to sound confident but trembled at the edges. Just a damn branch, scraping the car. I nodded, eager to accept any rational explanation. Yes, it must have been that. But we both knew there were no trees close enough to where we parked for a branch to touch the car. The rest of the way to my house was a blur. I remember seeing the clock on the dashboard, 10:53. Mike had kept his promise. He would bring me home before 11. But at that moment, my parents' curfew was the least of my concerns. When he parked in front of my house, I noticed my hands were numb from gripping the seat so tightly. The street was quiet and peaceful, with lights on in some windows, neighbors watching television, living their normal lives, oblivious to the terror we had just experienced. Well, Mike tried to smile. That was quite a night, huh? I forced a smile in return. Yes, I certainly won't forget it. He leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my face slightly, offering only my cheek. Something had changed between us, as if the shared fear had created an invisible barrier. "I'll call you tomorrow?" he asked, uncertainty in his voice. "Sure," I responded automatically. I opened the car door, the fresh night air a blessing after the suffocating atmosphere inside the Impala. I was about to get out when Mike held my wrist. "Wait," he said, his eyes fixed on something beyond me. "Let me check something." He got out of the car and came around to my side. I saw his silhouette in the half-light examining something on the passenger door. "Mike, what is it?" I asked, my heart starting to race again. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strangely distant, as if coming from another world. "Sarah, I think you'd better come see this." My legs felt as heavy as lead when I got out of the car. The fear that had momentarily diminished returned with full force, a cold wave that started at the base of my spine and spread to every nerve ending in my body. Mike was standing by the passenger door, his face pale under the yellowish light of the street lamp. His eyes were fixed on the car door handle. Slowly, as if moving through water, I approached. That's when I saw it. Hanging from the passenger door handle, reflecting the light on its rusted surface, was a metal hook. Not an ordinary fishing or butcher's hook. This was larger, cruder, obviously improvised from some industrial piece. and on the curved tip was something dark and viscous that could only be blood. The scream got stuck in my throat, transforming into a muffled moan. My legs gave way and Mike caught me before I fell. "He was here all along," I whispered, terror numbing my senses. "He followed us here." Mike didn't respond. His face was frozen in a mask of horror. With trembling fingers, he took a handkerchief from his pocket and carefully removed the hook from the door handle, holding it only by the edges. "We need to call the police," he finally said, his voice unrecognizable. What happened next was like a slow-motion nightmare. My parents being awakened by the sound of sirens, police officers taking pictures of the hook, asking endless questions, the family doctor giving me a mild sedative to calm my nerves. We found out later that Edward Garrity, the fugitive, had been found dead the next morning, his body discovered by a forest ranger at the base of a cliff in the Ellsworth Hills. The autopsy revealed that he had fallen, or jumped, shortly after our escape. His right hand was missing, replaced by an improvised mechanism that previously held a hook that was now in the evidence room of the Millbrook Police Department. The local newspapers reported the story for weeks. "Teenage couple narrowly. Escapes hook killer," read the headline in the Millbrook Chronicle. For a while, Mike and I were minor celebrities in town. People wanted to hear our story, how we had escaped, how we had been so brave. But I didn't tell them the complete truth. I didn't mention what I saw in the rearview mirror as we drove away from the lookout. The tall figure clinging to the back of the car, his face contorted in a demented smile, the hook firmly attached to the bumper. I didn't talk about how at some point during the frantic descent, he must have crawled to the passenger door, ready to rip open the handle and pull me out. And mainly, I never told anyone about the dreams. Vivid dreams where I wake up in the middle of the night hearing the slight scratching of metal against my window. Scry, scry. And when I look outside, I see a pale, bony face watching me, with a metal hook pressed against the glass. Mike and I broke up a month later. He said we needed space to process the trauma, but we both knew the truth. Every time we looked at each other, we remembered that night. Romance couldn't flourish in the shadow of such terror. I left Millbrook the following year for college and never returned to live there. I built a life, got married, not to Mike, had children and grandchildren. Over the years, the story of the Hook Man transformed into an urban legend, told by teenagers around campfires, each version more exaggerated than the last. Except it wasn't just a legend for me. It was, and continues to be, a scar on my soul, a reminder of how vulnerable we are to the forces of darkness. I never went to the movies to watch a horror film again. I never parked in isolated places again. And to this day, 60 years later, I check twice if the doors and windows are locked before going to sleep. Because I know deep in my soul that somewhere in the shadows, the metallic echo of the hook, man still resonates, patiently waiting to find its next victim. And no matter how much science and reason argue otherwise, a part of me believes that some souls are so perverse, so fundamentally evil, that not even death can contain them. Sometimes, when the night is particularly quiet and the moon particularly bright, I can still hear that sound. Scry, scry. Like a distant echo, like a call from the other side. And a part of me, a part that never aged beyond those terrified 17 years, knows that one day I will answer that call. Because the true horror isn't what happened that October night in 1962. The true horror is knowing that somehow it still isn't over. Story 2. When silence screams time is a fragile illusion. A transparent curtain that sometimes tears, revealing the abyss that was always there. My name is Jessica Lane. I'm 64 years old today, but in my memories, I'm forever that 19-year-old girl, frozen in the instant when I discovered that silence can scream. The summer of 1975 descended on the small town of Oak Ridge like a fever. An oppressive heat that bent the air above the asphalt and made skin burn under the sun's caress. I was home for summer break after completing my freshman year at the University of Portland. My parents expected the well-behaved daughter who had left the previous fall, but I returned different. The campus had transformed me, awakened something wild and hungry for experiences. Greg Donovan was that experience personified. I met him at Cliff's Diner, where I worked part-time organizing records in the small music section. He walked in with his worn leather jacket, green eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and a thin scar that divided his left eyebrow into two perfect halves. While other boys would win me over with words, Greg captivated me with silences, premeditated pauses that transformed any conversation into a minefield of tension and desire. His hands had calluses on the palms and scars on the knuckles. He told me he fixed cars, but maintained a gleam in his eyes that suggested another story, one I was desperate to unravel. After 2 weeks of secret meetings, Greg whispered in my ear a proposition that made my heart race. Let's go to Blackwood tomorrow night. Blackwood Forest was a 30-minute drive north of Oak Ridge. Everyone knew the stories. Unexplained disappearances, strange lights between the trees, and a clandestine cult that supposedly performed pagan rituals in the deepest parts of the forest. Most people avoided the place after sunset. My parents would have collapsed if they knew. Perhaps that's exactly why I agreed. The next night, July 17, 1975, Greg picked me up 2 streets down from my house, his black '67 Mustang purring like a predator lying in wait. The sun set on the horizon, bleeding across the sky as we drove out of town. The radio played "Love Will Keep Us Together" by Captain and Tennille, an irony I would only realize much later. "Have you been to Blackwood before?" I asked, trying to mask the nervousness growing in my chest like a climbing vine. Greg kept his eyes on the road, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel to the rhythm of a song only he could hear. "A few times," he answered with a half-smile. "There are places there few people know about." When we left the main road for a dirt trail, the sun had completely withdrawn. A dense, living darkness seemed to move between the trees flanking the road, their intertwined branches forming a tunnel that swallowed the car. The headlights created shadows that danced and contorted like conscious entities. The air changed. It became denser, laden with the damp smell of decaying vegetation and something more primitive that I couldn't identify. Breathing required effort, as if something invisible pressed against my chest. "Is everything okay?" Greg asked, noticing how I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "Yes," I lied. "Just didn't expect it to be so isolated." He laughed, a low sound that reverberated in the confined space of the car. "That's why we came. Privacy." His hand found my knee, his fingers tracing slow circles that sent shivers up my spine. Half fear, half desire. The trail ended in a small circular clearing, as if the forest had deliberately reseeded to create that space. Greg parked the car in the center, turned off the engine but left the radio on. A soft static filled the silence, occasionally punctuated by distorted fragments of words and music, as if the forest were manipulating the sound waves. The full moon hovered above us, a pale, watchful eye that poured a bluish light through the windshield. Under that spectral illumination, Greg's face seemed transformed, more angular, almost predatory. "Welcome to my secret place," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I tried to lose myself in that kiss, to push away the growing sensation that something fundamental was wrong with this place. It was as if the forest was watching us, evaluating, waiting. "Did you hear that?" I interrupted the kiss, pulling back slightly. "What?" Greg frowned, his eyes searching my face in the half-light. That voice, like a whisper. He shook his head. "It's just the wind in the trees." But there was no wind. The air was completely still, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Still, I could swear I heard something. Not exactly with my ears, but somewhere inside my own mind. A distant, almost melodic call in a language no human being had ever spoken. Greg interpreted my apprehension as nervousness from an inexperienced girl. His hand found my face, his thumb tracing the contour of my lower lip. "Hey, relax. Nobody's going to find us here." That was exactly my concern. Time advanced in irregular pulses. We talked about nothing in particular. Future dreams that now seem absurdly naive. Musical tastes, conspiracies about college professors. But behind every word loomed that sensation of something watching, waiting in the shadows outside. And then it began. A metallic sound, light, almost imperceptible, interrupted Greg in the middle of a story about how he and his friends had stolen the rival school's mascot. It was like fingernails lightly scratching the roof of the car. Scritch, scritch, screech. "What was that?" I asked, my body instantly rigid. Greg stopped, tilting his head to listen. The sound came again, a little louder. "Screech, screech, screech." "Probably just a branch," he answered, but his voice had lost its usual confidence. His eyes moved to the car's roof, following the sound that now seemed to move in a circular pattern. The radio increased its hissing, the static growing in intensity until any trace of music completely disappeared. In its place was a cacophony of sounds, fragments of distant voices, a muffled cry, and something that sounded horribly like a wet, guttural breathing. "Greg," I whispered, my hand gripping his arm hard enough to leave marks. "Something's wrong here." His eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine fear in them. Not the theatrical kind he sometimes displayed to appear vulnerable, but primordial, authentic terror. "It's just an animal," he insisted, but conviction had evaporated from his voice. "I'll take a look." "No!" I gripped his arm tighter. "Don't get out of the car." The scratching continued, now more insistent, more rhythmic, as if whatever was out there had found a satisfactory pattern and was perfecting it. Screech, screech, screech. Greg gently removed my hand from his arm. "Look, Jess, if it's some idiot trying to scare us, I need to show we're not intimidated." He opened the glove compartment and took out a flashlight, small but sturdy. "I'll take a quick look. It's probably just a squirrel or a loose branch. I'll be back in a minute." Before I could protest again, he opened the door and got out. The air that entered the car was abnormally cold for a July night, carrying an acrid odor of humus and something sweetish and putrid. The door closed and Greg disappeared into the darkness. The light from his flashlight danced between the trees, As he circled the car, I watched him through the window, my heart hammering so loudly, I feared it might attract whatever was out there. "I don't see anything," he shouted after completing a full circle. "I'm going to check a bit farther ahead." "Greg, no! Come back to the car!" I shouted, but he was already moving away, the light from his flashlight growing fainter as he advanced between the trees. And then, the light disappeared completely. "Greg!" I called, my voice sounding strangely small in the vast silence of the forest. Silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Not even the scratching on the roof continued. The forest became absolutely silent. No crickets, no owls, not even the whisper of leaves. It was as if the entire natural world had paused, holding its collective breath in anticipation. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. With each second, my fear grew exponentially. My fingers gripped the fabric of the car seat so tightly that my knuckles were white. Beads of sweat ran down my forehead, despite the cold that now permeated the car. "Greg!" I shouted again, desperate. Nothing. That's when the sound returned. Screech. 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 Louder now, more insistent, rhythmic, deliberate. Something was scratching the roof of the car, moving back and forth, slowly and methodically. Somewhere deep in my brain, a connection was trying to form. There was something familiar about that sound, something I should recognize. And then another sound joined the first, a soft plick, 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 like drops of liquid falling on the car's roof. I looked out the window, my hands trembling uncontrollably. There was no rain. The sky was clear, the moon shining relentlessly. Plick, plick, plick. Something was dripping down the windshield now, a dark, viscous liquid that looked black under the moonlight. Instinctively, I knew what it was before my rational mind could process it. Blood. A scream rose up my throat but got stuck there, transforming into a muffled moan. The world around me began to spin, the shadows of the forest elongating and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to advance toward the car. Screech, screech, screech. That's when I noticed, really noticed, the rhythm. The regularity, the pendular movement. The sound wasn't from claws or fingernails. It was from something heavier, denser, scratching the roof in a back-and-forth movement, back and forth, like a pendulum, like something swinging. My brain fought against the conclusion that was forming, refusing to connect the final dots. But a primitive part of me already knew, had already understood what was happening up there. Panic erupted inside me like a dam breaking. I crawled to the driver's side, my hands frantically searching for the keys that Greg had left in the ignition. I needed to get out of there. Now. That's when bright headlights flooded the clearing, momentarily blinding me. A car had appeared on the trail, its headlights like alien eyes penetrating the darkness. Someone was approaching. Relief flooded my system. Help had arrived. I was no longer alone with whatever was happening. I forced the door open and stumbled out, running toward the lights like a moth to a flame. "Please, help!" I screamed, my voice breaking. "Something happened to my boyfriend." The car stopped, and a silhouette emerged, a uniformed man, a police officer. I had never felt so much relief in my entire life. "Miss, stop right there," he shouted, his voice cutting through the night. "Don't look back, come to me now." It was the urgency in his voice, the barely contained terror that froze my blood, because it suggested there was something behind me. Something he could see in the light of his headlights. Something at the car. I disobeyed. Years later, in countless therapy sessions, this would be the decision we would revisit repeatedly. Why had I turned around? Why didn't I keep running toward the police officer? Why did my brain choose to absorb an image that no human being should have to process, but I turned? The headlights illuminated the Mustang like a macabre stage, and there, hanging from a thick oak branch that extended over the car, was Greg. His body swayed gently in the night breeze, suspended by something that gleamed in the light. A metal object deeply embedded in his neck. His legs, hanging just a few inches from the car's roof, scraped the metal with each oscillatory movement. Screech, screech, screech. A rhythmic, hypnotic pattern. His eyes were open. Not just open, but bulging in eternal terror, fixed on something I couldn't see. His face, once so confident and charming, was frozen in a grotesque mask of final horror. The blood, his blood, dripped down the car's roof, forming obscene trails across the windshield. I collapsed. My legs simply ceased to exist as functional structures. The world spun around me, the forest floor approaching at high speed. Strong arms caught me before I hit the ground. The police officer, Officer Callahan as I would later find out, held me while I shook uncontrollably. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, his voice breaking. "No one should see something like that." The following hours are disconnected fragments in my memory. Sirens pulsing against the trees, police radio voices, camera flashes, endless questions. And at some point, the discovery that froze my blood even more. The metal object in Greg's neck was a hook. Large, curved, industrial. A hook like those used in slaughterhouses or harbor warehouses. 3 days later, while I was still sedated at my parents' house, Officer Callahan came to visit us. He seemed to have aged a decade in those few days. He sat at the kitchen table, refusing coffee, his hands incessantly twirling his police hat. "I thought you should know," he said, looking mainly at my parents. "We found the culprit." He told us about a fugitive patient from the State Psychiatric Institute, a man named Conrad Mercer, a former slaughterhouse employee who had suffered a psychotic breakdown after an accident that cost him his right hand. Conrad had replaced his lost hand with a metal hook and developed the delusional belief that young couples in intimate situations were contaminated by demons that could only be exorcised through death. Was it him who... My mother couldn't finish the sentence. Officer Callahan nodded gravely. "We found items that belonged to your boyfriend in the cabin where he was hiding in the forest. He had a pattern, always hiding in the shadows, watching couples, always using the hook." That should have brought some comfort, knowing there was an explanation that the culprit had been identified. But one question persisted, one that I finally vocalized. "How did you know to come looking for us?" The look the officer exchanged with my parents was loaded with meaning. "There have been other incidents in Blackwood in recent weeks," he reluctantly admitted. "I started patrolling the area after the second couple, but we always arrived too late." The implication hung heavy in the room. Greg and I were just the latest in a series. How many other couples had experienced that terror in the depths of Blackwood? How many had ended up like Greg, suspended from a branch, their feet scraping the roof of their cars while their companions listened, not knowing what was happening? Mercer was captured a week later, attempting to attack another couple at a parking spot near the lake. He didn't resist arrest, just smiled with a vacant look and told the police that The demons would always find another host. He hanged himself in his cell 3 days later, using torn and twisted sheets. The guard said his body was found with his mouth open in a grotesque smile, his eyes fixed on the wall where he had scratched something with his own fingernails. A symbol that no one recognized, but which made the more superstitious officers cross themselves when they saw it. I should have felt relief at his death, perhaps even a perverse sense of justice, but all I felt was a profound emptiness and the disturbing certainty that something fundamental had broken in the world that night. Not just in my life, but in the very structure of reality. Because here's the truth. I never told anyone. Not even Officer Callahan or the therapists who tried to cure me in the years that followed. Before Greg left the car, while the scratching on the roof was beginning, I had looked at the back seat in the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment, so fleeting that it could have been imagination, I saw something there. A dark, contorted form, crouching in the narrow space, its contours shifting and floating like solid smoke. It had no face, just a dark opening where a face should be. And at the extremity of one of its limbs, something gleamed metallic in the moonlight. What torments me is not just Greg's death. It's the terrible possibility that Conrad Mercer wasn't delusional, that he may have seen something real in the shadows of Blackwood Forest, something that now visits me in dreams, scratching the walls of my psyche like a fingernail on a blackboard. Screech, screech, screech. I left Oak Ridge a month later and never returned. I built a life elsewhere, married to a gentleman who doesn't ask questions about my sleepless nights. Had children who grew up without knowing the complete story of why their mother compulsively checks the backseat of any car before getting. But even now, almost 50 years later, when the night is particularly dark and quiet, I still hear that sound. And I know, with a certainty that transcends logic, that it wasn't Mercer who killed Greg. It was something Mercer also saw. Something that used a hook not because it had lost a hand, but because it never had human hands to begin with. Something that still lives in Blackwood Forest, patiently waiting for unwary couples who venture too far from the city lights. Something that, sometimes I see from the corner of my eye, a shadow in the corner of a room, a peculiar movement reflected in a darkened window, a silhouette briefly outlined against the curtains when a car's headlights pass outside. And when the silence of night is absolute, I can almost hear its voice, not a sound that my ears pick up, but a presence that echoes directly in my mind, calling me back to Blackwood, to that clearing where time bent and reality fractured. Because the true horror is not that Greg was killed by a madman with a hook. The true horror is that after all these years, after all the rational explanations, after all the therapy and medication and denial, I still know, in the depths of my soul, that what was scratching the roof of the car wasn't Greg's feet. It was something much, much worse. And it's waiting for me, patient as only truly ancient things can be. Screech, screech, screech. Story 3. Headlights in the fog. There are moments that fracture a person's life into two distinct periods, before and after. For me, it wasn't a moment, but 11 minutes on a September night in 1986 that redrew the contours of my existence. My full name is Claire Matthews, and this is the story of the night I learned that sometimes what we interpret as pursuit might be a desperate attempt at salvation. The night in question had begun with the promise of normalcy. The transition from summer to autumn in Lakeview always brought with it a fog that formed at twilight, enveloping the town like a translucent shroud. It was rarely thick enough to cause visibility problems, just enough to soften the world's edges, rendering it mysterious and almost dreamlike. Jennifer Burke's party had been the event of the month, celebrating her 21st birthday at her house on the north side of town, an old Victorian property where the hallways seemed to whisper secrets from decades past. These ancient Lakeview houses harbored stories most residents preferred not to discuss. Legends of secret cults that had established themselves there in the 19th century. Rituals in forests, disappearances never explained. I had arrived at the party at 8, wearing a denim skirt and a sky blue blouse that, according to Melissa, my best friend, accentuated my eyes. Should have gone together, but she called me at the last minute with an excuse about headaches. Later I discovered the real reason was Richard Sanders, the boy from the swim team she'd been in love with for months and who had finally asked her out. The party was in full swing when I arrived, with the aroma of pizza, cheap beer, and the excessive perfume of teenagers trying to appear older than they actually were. The music, Madonna, Cyndi Lauper, and occasionally some classics from the 70s that Jennifer's father insisted on including, pulsated through the house's walls. In the darkest corners, couples formed and dissolved like ephemeral constellations. Daniel was there, of course, my ex-boyfriend of 3 weeks, now entertained with Rebecca Wilson, the cheerleader who always wore blood-red lipstick. I tried to ignore them, but in a small town like Lakeview, avoiding people is a luxury no one can afford. "Are you okay?" asked Tara, appearing at my side with a cup of something that smelled strongly of rum. "He's an idiot, you know that." I forced a smile. "I'm great, I didn't come here for him." I accepted the drink she offered me, the sweetened taste of rum and coke partially masking the burn of the alcohol. I wasn't much of a drinker. A girl with my family history learns early about the dangers of alcoholism. But that night, the idea of slightly blurring reality's edges seemed appropriate. It was almost midnight when I realized I'd drunk more than I'd planned. I wasn't drunk, just in an altered state of consciousness where colors seemed more vivid and sounds slightly distorted. Jennifer had put on "Every Breath You Take" by the Police, and couples moved slowly in the improvised dance room. The lyrics, which always seemed more disturbing than romantic to me, echoed through the house with an almost hypnotic quality. "Every breath you take, every move you make. I'll be watching you. I need to go," I announced abruptly, interrupting a conversation in which I was barely participating. "Already?" Tara protested. "It's only midnight. My parents only expect me back at 2. "My parents are waiting," I lied. The truth was they had traveled to visit my sick grandmother in Rochester, trusting that at 19 I was responsible enough to stay alone for a weekend. And I need to be at work tomorrow at 9. The last part was true. My part-time job at the municipal library didn't forgive lateness, especially on Saturdays, when eager children arrived for story time. "I can give you a ride," offered Jason, a senior with whom I'd exchanged glances throughout the night. His eyes had a predatory gleam that made me instinctively recoil. "Thanks, but I have my car," I replied, grabbing my purse. "Are you sure you're okay to drive?" Tara whispered, genuine concern in her voice. "I'm fine. I only had 2 drinks and the last one was almost an hour ago." That was another lie. I'd lost count after the 3rd cup, but I sincerely believed I was in condition to drive. Lakeview wasn't big, and my house was only 20 minutes away. I stepped into the night, the temperature having dropped considerably since I'd arrived. The fog, which earlier had been just a translucent veil, had densified into an almost tangible mass. Beneath the streetlights, it seemed to dance and contort, assuming shapes that sometimes resembled human figures before dissolving again into white homogeneity. My dark blue Toyota Corolla was parked at the end of the street, a graduation gift from my parents, representing years of saving and sacrifice so I could have the independence they valued so much. I got in and turned the key, the engine coming to life with a soft purr. The radio turned on automatically, tuned to WLKV, the only local station. Careless Whisper by George Michael filled the car, its melancholy perfectly intertwining with the fog that now seemed to pulse to the rhythm of the music. I adjusted the mirrors, taking a moment to make sure I was really in condition to drive. My reflexes seemed normal, my vision clear enough. I set the car in motion, the wheels sliding silently on the damp asphalt. The sensation came almost immediately, a tingling at the base of my spine, as if someone were softly blowing on the nape of my neck. Instinctively, I looked at the back seat through the rearview mirror, empty. Naturally, and yet, I was halfway home when I first noticed the headlights. 2 points of light that seemed to float in the fog behind me, maintaining a constant distance. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. After all, Lakeviews, streets, though not congested at midnight, were rarely completely deserted. But there was something about the way those lights followed me, never getting too close, never falling too far behind. Like a patient predator studying its prey. Paranoia, I muttered to myself, slightly increasing the radio's volume. The music had changed to Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, her ethereal voice mingling with the fog that now infiltrated the car through invisible cracks. I turned onto Elm Street, a residential street that offered a shortcut to my house. The cottage headlights turned too. Coincidence, I insisted, but my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. I accelerated slightly, the headlights behind me matched. I slowed down, testing. The headlights also slowed, maintaining that same unsettling distance. Paranoia began to crystallize into concrete fear. I remembered the stories my mother told about predators on the roads, killers who chose random victims, following them until they found the perfect moment to attack. Stories I had always dismissed as scare tactics to keep teenagers out of trouble, but at this moment, with the fog densifying at every corner, those stories seemed deeply plausible. I made an unexpected turn onto Cedar Avenue, hoping to shake off whoever was following me. Cedar was known for its winding curves and ancient trees that formed a tunnel over the road, a beautiful place during the day, but eerily isolated at night. The headlights continued following me, apparently undisturbed by my evasive maneuver. Heart raced, beating against my ribs like a caged bird trying to escape. The tingling in my spine intensified, becoming almost painful. That's when the headlights abruptly approached. In a matter of seconds, they were almost glued to my rear bumper, the intense light flooding my car, transforming the interior into a brutally illuminated stage. "What the hell?" I shouted, instinctively accelerating. The car behind me was large and dark, impossible to identify the exact model through the blinding glare of its headlights. It seemed to swallow all the light around it, like a moving black hole. And then, something even more disturbing happened. The headlights began to flash, not the casual pattern of someone signaling to pass, but a frantic, almost desperate rhythm, like Morse code transmitting a panic message. My breathing became shallow, the air inside the car suddenly dense and insufficient. For a fleeting moment, I considered stopping. Maybe it was someone I knew, trying to alert me about something wrong with my car. But that sensation at the base of my spine, that primordial instinct of danger that we inherited from ancestors who survived by recognizing threats before they attacked, screamed for me to continue. I accelerated more, the Toyota's engine protesting with a high-pitched roar. The speedometer showed 70 mph on a street with a 35 limit. The trees on both sides of the road transformed into indistinct blurs through the fog. The car behind me accelerated too, staying glued to my bumper. Now, besides the frantically flashing lights, a horn began to sound, not in short, polite honks, but in a long, uninterrupted roar of urgency. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, tears of panic beginning to blur my vision. That's when I noticed something. A movement in the back seat of my car, captured by the rearview mirror. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, like the soft adjustment of fabric settling, or someone moving. My eyes jumped to the rearview mirror, my heart almost stopping in my chest. For a second, no more than that, I thought I saw a reflection. That wasn't mine. A pale face partially obscured by shadows watching me from the back seat. The scream got stuck in my throat, transforming into a strangled sound that didn't even seem human. I needed to get home. Now. My house was only 2 blocks away. I could see the centennial oak that marked the entrance to our street, its leaves trembling in the night breeze like waving fingers. The car behind me now had not only flashing headlights and a blaring horn, but was also trying to overtake me. Instinctively, I moved my car to block the attempt, a decision that, in retrospect, could have cost me more than just that night. When I turned onto my street, my headlights briefly illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road, a tall man wearing dark clothes, his face indistinguishable in the fog. I swerved sharply, almost losing control of the car. When I looked again through the rearview mirror, the figure had disappeared. "It's not real," I whispered to myself. "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." My driveway never looked so inviting. Braking abruptly, I parked the car haphazardly and stumbled out, leaving the key in the ignition and the door open. I ran to the front door, my hands trembling, so much I could barely hold the keys. Behind me, the dark car stopped with a screech of tires. Door opened and slammed, rapid footsteps on the sidewalk. "Miss, wait!" I ignored the call, finally managing to insert the key into the lock. When the door opened, I threw myself inside and slammed it shut again, immediately locking it. The knocking began almost instantly. Strong, insistent, desperate. "Miss, please open the door, you're not safe." The voice was male, deep, with an urgency that seemed genuine, but my terror was stronger than any appeal to reason. I ran to the phone in the kitchen, dialing 911 with fingers that seemed to belong to someone else. 3 interminable rings before someone answered. "1, what's your emergency?" "There's someone trying to break into my door," I gasped, the words coming out in an uncontrolled torrent. 12 Maple Street, please come quickly." The knocking on the door continued, now accompanied by increasingly frantic appeals. "Miss, you need to listen to me. There's someone in your car. Please call the police." A primordial cold spread through my body when those words penetrated the fog of terror in my mind. Someone in my car. That movement I thought I'd seen in the rearview mirror. The fleeting reflection of a face that wasn't mine. Ma'am, are you listening to me?" The 911 operator's voice seemed to come from very far away. "A patrol car is on the way. Can you tell me if you're alone in the house?" "Yes," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the front door where the knocking continued. "I'm alone. My parents are traveling. Stay on the line with me until the officers arrive, okay? They're just a few minutes away." I nodded, forgetting that the person on the other end of the line couldn't see me. The sirens arrived before I could say anything more. The strident sound cut through the night's fog, its artificial wail strangely comforting in its normality. The knocking on the door ceased immediately. Through the living room curtain, I saw red and blue lights pulsing, illuminating the fog like an alien light show. Male voices exchanging short, precise orders. Footsteps on the sidewalk. Then, a new knock on the door. Different from the previous one. More controlled, more official. "Lakeview Police. Miss Matthews?" I opened the door with still trembling hands to find two uniformed police officers. An older man with graying hair and a face marked by time, and a young man who seemed only a few years older than me. "Miss Matthews? I'm Officer Bennett, and this is Officer Rodriguez. We received your call about an intruder." Before I could respond, I noticed a third person a few steps behind them. A middle-aged man wearing jeans and a dark jacket. His face was pale, covered by a thin layer of sweat, and his eyes had that same urgent quality that had been in his voice when he was knocking on my door. "This is Mr. Thomas," explained Officer Bennett, noticing where my gaze had drifted. "He was the one knocking on your door. He was chasing me," I accused, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "He followed me all the way from Jennifer's house." Mr. Thomas stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of supplication. "I was trying to warn you, miss. I saw when you stopped at that traffic light on Main Street. There was a man crouching behind a bush. He approached your car when the light was red and his voice faltered, and Officer Rodriguez took over the explanation, his professional tone contrasting with the disturbing nature of his words. "Miss Matthews, Mr. Thomas saw someone trying to enter your car while you were stopped at the traffic light. He tried to alert you, but you interpreted it as a threat and fled. He followed you to ensure your safety." I stood paralyzed, unable to fully process what was being said. But there was no one in my car. I would have noticed. That's when Officer Bennett spoke, his voice soft but firm. "Miss, I think you should come see this." I followed the three men to my car, still haphazardly parked in the driveway, the driver's door still open, the keys still in the ignition. The engine had died, but the radio continued playing, now transmitting static with occasional fragments of distorted music. Officer Bennett pointed his flashlight at the ground beside the car. In the damp earth, clearly visible, were footprints, large, from boots beginning somewhere near the street and circling my car to the passenger door. "And that's not all," he said, moving the flashlight to illuminate the passenger door handle. In the silver metal, under the flashlight's beam, deep scratch marks gleamed. Not the kind made by keys or coins, but by something cruder and blunter. And among the scratches was something that reflected the light differently. Darker, more viscous. "Is that—" I couldn't finish the question. "Blood," confirmed Officer Rodriguez, his voice now less professional, more human. "And look at this." He was illuminating something partially hidden under my car. A metallic object, curved and pointed. A hook like those used in butcher shops or docks, but modified, with one side sharpened like a blade. "My God," I whispered, my entire body trembling now. Mr. Thomas approached, his voice calmer but still carrying contained urgency. I saw when he tried to open the passenger door while you were waiting at the traffic light. There was something strange in his hand. I discovered later it was this. He pointed to the hook without touching it. I tried to warn you, but you just accelerated. The more I tried to get close, the faster you drove. We found similar footprints at other scenes, said Officer Bennett, his voice now somber. 3 attacks in the last 2 weeks, all young women driving alone at night. The others? I couldn't finish the question, my throat suddenly dry, as paper. The look the officers exchanged was answer enough. You were lucky, said Officer Rodriguez. Very lucky that Mr. Thomas was nearby and noticed what was happening. I looked at the man whom, minutes before, I had considered my pursuer. His face was still pale, but there was something in his eyes. No longer that desperate urgency, but a deep exhaustion mixed with relief. It was him I saw in the rearview mirror, I whispered, the pieces finally fitting together. When I thought, I saw someone in the back seat. It was his reflection trying to get in through the passenger door. Officer Bennett nodded gravely. The perpetrator tries to enter his victims' cars while they're stopped at traffic lights or isolated locations. If he manages to get in, he hides in the back seat until the victim reaches a more remote location. If he can't, he left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was clear. We need you to come to the station to make a formal statement, said Officer Rodriguez, and one of our officers will stand guard at your house tonight, in case the suspect returns. I nodded mechanically, still unable to fully process everything that had happened. The fog seemed to have infiltrated my mind, making everything slightly unreal, like a blurred photograph of a nightmare. Before getting into the police car, I turned to Mr. Thomas. Thank you, I said, my voice almost inaudible. I know what you thought, he gently interrupted. Anyone would have thought the same. I'm just grateful I got there in time. When we were about to leave, I asked what tormented me most. Do you have any idea who he is? The man with the hook? Officer Bennett hesitated, exchanging a look with his partner before answering. We have a partial description from witnesses. A tall, thin man with a deformed or mutilated arm. Survivors mention that he seems to have something metallic in place of one of his hands. A chill ran down my spine. Like a hook? Exactly like a hook. During the following weeks, the police maintained constant surveillance at my house and on Lakeview streets. A sketch of the suspect, now known as the Hook Man, was distributed throughout the town. I discovered that Mr. Thomas, William as I came to call him, had lost his daughter 6 months earlier, victim of a similar attack in a neighboring town. Since then, he had patrolled the streets at night, vigilant, determined to prevent other families from experiencing the same tragedy. The perpetrator was never captured. Eventually, the attacks in Lakeview ceased, only to resume months later in another town 100 miles away. Like a virus, the violence had merely migrated, finding a new host. Almost 4 decades have passed since that September night. Lakeview's fog continues to form at autumn twilights, enveloping the town like a ghostly mantle. Young people still drive alone at night, believing themselves invulnerable. And I, although I've built a life many would consider normal, marriage, children, career, now retirement, have never driven alone after dark again. I still check the back seat of any car before getting in. I still feel a shiver down my spine when headlights get too close in the rearview mirror. I still have nightmares where I'm driving down an endless road, pursued by lights that never reach me, while something in the back seat silently breathes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Because I learned, on that foggy night, a truth that most people have the luxury of ignoring. Not all monsters are supernatural. Some are painfully human, walking among us with plastic smiles and hidden hooks. And not all pursuers are predators. Some are unlikely guardian angels, desperately flashing their headlights in the darkness, trying to alert us to a danger we cannot see. The world is full of stories like mine, moments when the veil between safety and terror becomes as thin as autumn fog. Moments when we only realize the danger after it has passed, leaving only scratch marks on our doors and on our souls. So the next time you're driving alone at night and you notice headlights insistently flashing behind you, take a pause before accelerating to flee. It might be that someone is trying to save you from a nightmare that hasn't yet begun. Or it might be that it has already begun silently in the back seat of your car.